The date is Wednesday, November 17th, 1982. Okay, your name is
Addie Wilcox.
Addie Wilcox, and you just celebrated your 90th birthday.
Yes.
What is your birth date?
The October 29
October 29th. And you were born where?
in Westboro, Missouri.
Westboro, Missouri. Now, where is that from here? Is it near St. Joe or?
You know where Tarkio is?
Yes.
We were 10 miles northeast of that.
I see. Now, did you live there a long time? When did you come to Nebraska?
When I was about 16.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Now, how many were there in your family? Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes. 2 brothers and 3 sisters.
Mm-hmm. Are any of them living yet? Mrs. Wire?
Yeah,
Mrs.
McNeely.
Wire.
McNeely.
Oh, McNeely. Your maiden name was Wire.
Yes.
That, I was confused.
Yes.
Yes, I knew that. Mm-hmm. And you came here when you were 16, so you went to school in Missouri
Yes.
then. You didn't go to school here.
Yes, I graduated from here.
Oh, you came to you were in high school here, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I was in the 9th grade when I came to Nebraska.
Now, what year did you graduate? Do you remember?
1911.
1911. Do you remember how many there were in your class?
Well, it wasn't a big class. No, I don't remember.
Oh, well, it isn't important. I thought maybe you might remember. Let's see, 1911. Well, the old big brick square school would have been a new building yet then, wouldn't it? Fairly new.
Well, I expect, yes.
See, it was built in 1902, so
Oh,
it wasn't
yes.
really an old building then. Okay, your parents' names?
First names, you mean?
Yes.
Franklin and Jane.
Franklin and Jane Wire. Uh-huh. Wire, W-I-A-R, wasn't it?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes.
And you told me about your brothers and sisters. And you were married to Ernest Wilcox, right?
Yes.
And when was your wedding date?
1911, January the 11th, 1913.
1913. 2 years after you graduated.
Yes.
Uh-huh. And you made your home where? Here in town?
Yes, in Table Rock.
Right here in
Yes,
town, did you?
yes.
Did you always live in town?
No, we lived at Pawnee some and 6 years at Auburn, Nebraska.
Oh, and I
On
didn't
a
know
farm.
that. You lived on a farm?
Yes.
Uh-huh. 6 years. And then you came back to Table Rock?
Yes. We were working on a farm over there for another man, you know.
I see. Uh-huh.
And then we came to Table Rock and farmed for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, when I first remember you folks, now Ernest worked for Lawrence as a harvest hand. I remember him.
Yes, he always went out.
And I remember you had a fire. Your home burned,
Oh,
didn't
yes,
it?
yes.
Down there. Now, that house was east of where Albert and Bessie Rexroth lived, wasn't
Yes,
it? Uh-huh.
yes.
Now, did everything burn for you that time?
Yes, everything.
My goodness, how many children were still at home? You had several at home yet, I think, didn't you?
All but one of them, I think.
Oh,
All but,
really? Were there that
yes.
many? I know. What year was that fire? Do you remember that?
I believe it was 1936.
1936.
About a little after 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, my. Started
Yes.
from the heater, did it? Or
No, it must have been, well, it couldn't have been electric because we didn't have electricity then. We just never knew what started.
Well, it's another one of those fires that just start and you never know
Yes,
how. Mm-hmm.
Well, we had some oily dust rags down in the bottom of a cupboard. And we thought that was
That's
just
good.
the only thing that we
That you
could
could
think
think
of
of.
that might have done it.
Is that right? Well, my, that was too bad, though. I think a fire is such a
Oh,
disaster.
it certainly was.
Okay, and you had how many children?
12.
12. And did they all survive? Did
Yes, oh yes.
They all grew up.
Yes.
And you have 10 living now,
Yes,
don't you?
Yes.
And how many were here for your party?
9.
9. Oh, my goodness.
The oldest girl was just out of the hospital from an operation,
Mm-hmm.
and she wanted the doctor to let her fly back for the day, but he wouldn't do it.
Oh, well, probably better that
yes,
she didn't.
Yeah. He said she needed to be close to where he could watch her,
Well, sure.
and she was
My
awful
goodness.
disappointed because they'd planned this for a year.
Well, yes, I imagine she was. Now, where does she live?
In Oregon.
In Oregon.
Yes.
Well, now there was a son here from Oregon, wasn't there?
Yes, it was several loads of them from Oregon.
Oh, yes. Well, there's more than one living in Oregon?
All 5 of them.
Oh, there's 5 living in
Yes.
Oregon.
And 5 in Nebraska.
And 5 in Nebraska. Well, that's nice. Then you have, at least those can visit with their own people up
Yes,
there, and
yes.
here you have some of them close.
Mhm.
Did you have a doctor when your babies were born?
Oh, yes.
You always
Yes,
had one?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Now, I didn't go to the hospital.
No, they didn't in
People
those
didn't
days.
do it then.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we didn't have any of these small hospitals anyway.
No, that was before. Well, Dr. McCrae had. I remember his hospital when I was operated for appendicitis when I was 7 years old. That would have been in the 20s, though.
Oh, yes.
He had this old building going as a
Yes.
hospital. But back in when you were married, had been first married, I don't suppose they had.
No.
Uh-huh.
No.
Well, how many grandchildren do you have?
I have 37 grandchildren. And I think it's 60 great-grandchildren.
Oh, my goodness.
And 4 great-great-grandchildren.
Oh, my. That's a crowd.
Yes, it is.
It sure is.
Yeah, we had 65 for dinner down at my birthday
Well, there were a lot of
party.
people around.
Yes.
Oh, that was nice.
Those were all family, the 65.
Well, that was really great. Do you remember anything special about when you first came to Table Rock? Anything special that, or in all the years you lived here, anything that really stands out in your mind? Anything that happened?
Well, I can't think of anything right now. Of course, we didn't go much. We didn't have cars. And church was the main thing we attended,
Yes.
you know.
Sure.
We were always in church and Sunday school.
Were you here when they had the big fire in Table Rock? Did you
No.
live? You didn't live
No.
here at the time. That
Well,
would have been in 19
I think that was why we were living at Auburn.
probably was.
Yes.
You wouldn't. Well, when you didn't live here, why? Do you remember anything special about weather? Any bad storm or real bad year or anything that?
Well, I remember the first year that we were married. Oh, it was so dry. And we lived there where Lyle Sturgeon lives.
Mm-hmm.
And of course the travel was all around that corner. And the dust, the wheels, you know, just be way down into the dust. And the dust was just terrible. It was so dry that year.
Is that right?
Mhm.
Well, and of course, I suppose there were some. Do you remember any bad winters that we had or anything? Last year was a honey, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, not particularly. That one year we had so much snow, but that wasn't very long ago.
Mm-hmm. In your earlier days.
Yeah, well, it wasn't too many years ago. We had so much snow, cover the cars, you know.
Mm-hmm. Now, when was that? Let's see, that influenza, when they had so much influenza, was that before World War I? Do you remember that? Did you have any problem, or was that before
No,
that?
we didn't have any of that in our family.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when it was so bad.
So many people were sick, and a lot of them
Yes,
died,
yes.
and I just don't recall what year that was. Wasn't that around World War I? Or was it before that?
Well, I sort of forget. But I can remember when it happened.
Mm-hmm. You just made the statement that it seemed like every pregnant woman died. My
Yes.
goodness, that must have been terrible.
Well, around any of it we knew of did, and it was commented on that it was so hard on the women, you know.
Well, my goodness. I see this. I brought along this picture
Oh.
of all your children that was in the Argus. Which one is the oldest?
Harold.
Harold is the oldest.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Can you name all of them
Oh, yes.
as they were born?
Yes.
Okay.
Harold was born on Christmas Day.
Really?
Yes.
Well, for whose Christmas present?
Yes.
That would have been probably about, what, 1915? So you said you were born in 1913, or you were
He was
married in 1913?
1913. It must have been 15.
Christmas Day. How about
Yes.
that? And then who's next?
Lucille was next. She was
Lucille.
the one that couldn't come.
Uh-huh.
And then Chauncey from Humboldt.
Yes, we know him.
And Jean, Ruth. And then David, one of the boys that he was killed in a timber accident.
Yes, out west, wasn't he? I
Yes,
remember that.
yes. And Dorothy. And Richard. Doris. Bob. Lyle and Lawrence. Is that 12? I think that's all of them.
I didn't count.
I didn't.
One of your boys was lost his life in the service.
Yeah, that was Lawrence.
Oh,
I
that was
the
the youngest one.
Yes.
I see. I remember that real well
The
because
Korean War.
I've lost my brother in World War II.
Oh, yes.
And so of course, I remember that you lost. Somehow you remember. You noticed those
Yes,
things.
yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. And you're quite a quilter. Do you know how many quilts you've made already? I know you make several every winter.
I've made and given away 24.
Now, who are the lucky people that get these? Your granddaughters, probably?
All 10 of my children have a quilt.
Uh-huh.
And then the rest of them are grandchildren.
24.
Yes.
My goodness, that's a lot of needlework,
Yes,
isn't it?
it is.
Do you use different patterns, or do you use? I see everyone I've seen is the 9 patch. You must like the 9 patch.
Well, I can get that together better now.
Mhm.
I've used other patterns. The first ones I made was variable star. And
Oh.
it was real pretty. I made a couple like that.
Those are more complicated than
Yes,
this, aren't they?
yes.
But this one is
And-
pretty. This one is the blocks are put together with gold, and it's very pretty.
I have another pattern that I use, but I don't know what it's called. When Mrs. Herrick died, she left a few blocks made,
I
that she
see.
hadn't finished.
Mhm.
So Jean brought it over, and I finished making it, and the pattern, of course, was there.
Mhm.
So I've used that pattern quite a bit now.
Mhm.
I have another one ready to go in the frames when I get this one made. And this is for a granddaughter, and the next one is a grandson.
Oh.
Harold's boy, they just have the one boy. And his mother makes Afghans.
Oh, yeah.
She's made all her family but him one. He said he didn't want one. He wanted one of Grandma's quilts.
Oh, well, quilt's mighty nice, and especially in these days when the heating is so expensive,
Yes.
those quilts are pretty cozy.
Yes. But I won't get his made till after Christmas. It'll be pretty close to Christmas when I get this one finished,
Mhm.
because
And you quilt them, you fine quilt them, don't
oh
you?
yes, yes.
Yeah, don't your finger get sore?
Oh yes. And I have arthritis in my hands now, and the ends of my fingers don't have much feeling in them,
Uh-huh.
and so it's pretty hard to feel that needle sometimes.
My aunt, who is younger than you, she's 86, but she complains that she doesn't have any, Mary Hunsinger, you know,
Mhm.
she doesn't have feeling in her
No,
fingers.
I don't either.
And
Then you have to lay off a couple of days till your fingers heal up.
yes, I've done a little quilting. I know how that is. Now, you spoke about in the old days how they made ice, and your brother worked with that?
Yes, my brother Oscar. He, anybody that had a team of horses and a wagon hauled ice.
Mhm.
And they made it, or they got it out at the Horseshoe Lake, northeast of town.
I see. Now, this Horseshoe Lake would have been north of where Howard Binder lives now,
Yes,
right?
up in there someplace.
Up in there. It would have been along the river somewhere, wouldn't it? Along the Nemaha.
Yes. And it was they had a regular picnic place there, and had a few boats and a boathouse, and we had our Sunday school picnics there.
Oh, yes.
In the summertime.
Uh-huh. Now, where did they keep this ice?
Well, they had ice houses everybody that had any need for ice had an ice house out back of their store.
I suppose, well, like the butchers in those days, we had the meat markets, didn't they?
Yes,
So they, I
yes.
suppose, had
Yes.
to have it, and the grocers
And
probably.
of course, if you made ice cream, you had to go to town and buy your ice.
Yes. Well, of course, ice cream wasn't an everyday thing in those days, was
No,
it? Maybe a
no.
4th of July and special occasion like
Yes.
that.
Well, people that had their own cows and own cream, why, made it oftener, you see.
Now, how did they keep this ice? You say they all had. And now, did they? What kept it from melting in the summertime?
Well, it was dug down in the ground for a ways, and then they packed it in sawdust.
And probably had canvas or something over it too. I suppose.
Yes.
But I imagine that it melted to some extent anyway. It would
Well,
have
I
to.
imagine it would. Yes.
That had to be a cold job. They had to wait till the ice got mighty thick before they could.
Yes.
Now, how did they work it up? How did they make the blocks?
Well, they sawed it with a handsaw
Oh my goodness!
and cut it in big blocks, you know. And then, of course, I suppose there was somebody to help load it onto the wagons and somebody to help unload it.
Sounds like it was a heavy job.
It was a
hauling
big job,
those,
yes.
picking it up, and then imagine they got some wet because the water would splash naturally when
Yeah.
they'd pull it out, and then loading it up on the wagons and unloading it again. That had to be hard work.
Yes, yes. I don't know too much about that part of it,
Yes.
but I know it was a big job.
What kind of work did your husband do? He just worked wherever he could, or did he have?
Well, it was farm work mostly.
Farm work,
Yes.
That's the way I remember him. As he
Yes.
was, and that was in those days before the big machinery. There was a need
Yes.
for a lot of help, wasn't there, on
Yes,
farms? Now it seems like we have the big machines, and their hired men just aren't so common like they were then.
No.
And back, well, harvest hands and shocking wheat and oats
Yes.
and pitching it into the
Yes.
thrashing time.
And they kind of followed the threshing machine, you know.
Sure.
And
haying time too. My hay used to be a
Yes.
hard job too. Mow it
Yes.
and rake it and then make the stacks, and there were no balers. Well, there were. Now and then there was a baler, but then most of it was put up by hand, wasn't it?
Yes,
Stacked.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
people had their barns fixed so they could put it in the barns
Yes,
too.
Yes, I remember they had usually a barn had a hayloft up above
Yes.
the main part of the barn.
Yes.
We had a barn like that out on, well, it's still there, in fact, and full of old hay, too.
Yeah.
You say you used to play on the hay on a rainy day?
Yes.
That used to be a fun thing, wasn't it? And
Yes.
did you have a place, a hole, that you pushed hay into for the animals down below?
Yes, yes. I had a ladder to go up, and
That used to be my job when I was a girl. Oh, I was a bigger girl already, but I'd push hay down for the horses, and then it was a lot of fun to just, instead of coming down the ladder, why you'd just go down through that hole, through that opening, and land on that nice soft pile of hay. Now you're telling us about Horseshoe Lake.
and the picnic part was sort of an island, and then the water was around that where we used the boats, of course. But there was a bridge that you had to cross over into that island. And it was one of these that was just partly made with wire. The first and the last of it was solid, but when you got onto that wire, every time you stepped, you went down. Then you come up, down. I knew that it would endanger my life every time I crossed it. And a 16-year-old kid don't stay in one place very long, you know. And I used to hate to go across that bridge. But that's where we had our Sunday school picnics. We had good times. And nobody ever got hurt on the bridge that I knew of. But I was afraid of it anyway.
Now it had boards. You walked on boards.
Yes.
But they were hung on cables or something.
Yeah, on wire.
Oh, on wires.
Yes.
Oh, I imagine that every time you stepped, it swung a little and gave you
Yes.
quite a thrill.
Yeah. They had 4 or 5 boats there.
Was somebody in charge of it? Did it belong to anyone? Or
I think it did. I think a club or something.
Mhm.
I don't know. I can't remember about that now.
I wonder, I'm going to ask you a question. Maybe you know about this, maybe you don't. Several years ago, we were out northwest of town here, and there's a little cemetery out there that originally was the Methodist Church Cemetery. Do you know anything about that cemetery?
Well, it's called the Clear Creek Cemetery.
Mhm.
Yes, and there's some of the Wilcox buried there.
Is that right?
Yes.
Of course, some of the Wilcoxes lived out in that neighborhood,
Yes,
didn't they?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Well, Earl Wilcox still lives
Yes,
there.
I know he lives
Yes,
close there.
Yeah. Yes, Ernie's brother Chan lived there, and of course Goldwyn.
And there was Joe. Was he your brother? Was Joe
Yes.
Ernie's brother?
Yes.
How many
No, Joe was Chan's son.
Oh, I see.
Nephew.
I see. Did your husband come from a large family? Do you remember?
Well, there was 7 or 8 of them. I
Yes.
forget just how.
Families were quite large in those days.
Yes.
Uh-huh. His parents, what was his father's name? Do you remember?
Byron.
Byron Wilcox.
He was a mail carrier.
Oh, yes. Now, I have a picture of him in the history room in the Argus office there. And I don't know where that picture came from, but it kind of a box like
Yes.
on a wagon.
I think I have one of those too.
And I believe that the date on it was 1910. Would it be about then?
Well, it could have been, yes.
And now, was he the one? Somebody told me that they had a mail carrier that whistled. I wonder if that was Mr. Wilcox. So they could always hear him whistling before they saw him coming.
Well, I don't know. It was not.
And now he was Ernest's father.
Yes.
And his name was Byron?
Byron.
Byron Wilcox. Well, now that's interesting. And he was a mail carrier. There were surely others, I suppose,
Yes, yes.
out of town.
I think they had 3 routes then.
Hmm. And then there were 2 when we were first married, and now there's only the one.
Mhm.
Of course, everything is so mechanized now.
Yes.
I can remember when Harlan Taylor was when we lived out on the farm southeast on that first place on Lawrence's place, and of course there weren't gravel roads then, mud roads, and oh my goodness, those mail carriers really had a job getting around.
Yes, they did.
And I remember Lawrence pulled him out many a times. His wheels would be so wide, he'd be so balled up with mud, he just couldn't move.
Mhm.
Now they just zip along on their gravel roads and don't even know what bad roads are. That's right.
Well,